Today we're going to be setting up a low-tech 10-gallon planted aquarium using an under gravel filter. Now this tank was previously set up using the dirted deep sand bed method. However, it has become a little overrun by algae, so I've decided to try something new, or old as the case may be, with a new setup and an under gravel filter. Now the new setup will continue to house the small group of ember tetras that called this tank home. But for the time being, I have moved them to a small holding tank. And that way we don't have to rush anything and we can really try to create something special for them. Now I did try to save as many of the plants and as much of the hardscape from the original setup as I could. And this includes a nice piece of spiderwood and a few river pebbles, a couple of varieties of ANUBIAS and some subwassertang. And to add to that, I've also picked up some Java FERN and what I think is some sort of a Alodia oxygenating weed. And I've also got a couple of pothos cuttings from my pothos plant. Other equipment I shall be using is a 55-watt heater, a Hygger LED Light, a little nano air pump, and of course the under gravel filter. Also, I've got 3 2-kilogram bags of natural gravel, and it's sort of like a small pea gravel and should be perfect to go on top of the under gravel filter plate. Now, the actual under gravel filter I'm using is the Boyu under gravel filter, which I picked up on Amazon. And the only reason I chose this one in particular is that it's modular, so it can be clipped together in a variety of different ways to fit really any shaped aquarium. The only thing I did have to do to modify the filter was to trim down the uplift tube, as it was a little bit too long for this little 10-gallon aquarium. So now that the under gravel filter is clipped together to fit the tank and is in position, we just need to add the gravel on the top. But before I do that, I am actually going to add the spiderwood in, and that is just because the spiderwood is attached to a piece of slate to stop it from floating, and I just want the gravel to cover that up. So that's the hardscape and the gravel in, and I've just sloped that towards the back right hand corner, and that's really just for aesthetic purposes. But yeah, now that's all done, I'm going to move on to the Java FERN, and I've got this lovely narrow leaf Java FERN which I actually bought pre-attached to a piece of driftwood. I'm just going to pop that in the back right hand corner to give a bit of a jungly feel. And it will also give the fish somewhere to hide and take cover if they so wish. And I do actually think the narrowleaf Java FERN is one of the best plants for small tanks because of how it can give that jungly feel, but won't grow too quickly and take over the whole tank like some plants can. Also, in this case, it's going to help cover the uplift tube from the under gravel filter. So that's the narrowleaf Java FERN in, so I'm going to move on to the ANUBIAS. And I think this is ANUBIAS barteri, and I'm going to just wedge it under the spiderwood here. And that should hold it nicely in place because much like the Java FERN, ANUBIAS is an epiphyte plant, which means you don't have to plant it in the substrate, but instead attach it to hardscape or wedge it into little gaps or crevices like we've done here. So next up, I've got another piece of ANUBIAS, but ANUBIAS nano this time, which is a slightly smaller variety. I've actually glued it onto one of the river pebbles using some instant contact super glue, which is completely fish, shrimp, snail and plant safe, so don't worry about that. And I've also done exactly the same with a couple of pieces of Java FERN WINDELOV, and I think it's starting to look pretty nice. We've got a few more plants to go yet though, but what I want to do first is to get this tank into its final location and get it filled up with some water. So there we go, the tank is in position, filled up, dechlorinator and heater have been added, and I also added the air stone to the uplift tube of the under gravel filter, and the air is now running. But moving on to the last few plants, first up we've got a moss ball, a nice easy low light plant, just chuck that in there. It'll be covered in beneficial bacteria, which is handy. I've also got some subwassertang, which I'm going to just put down here at the front. That should over time sort of start to carpet in a little bit. And I've also heard it's pretty good at using up excess nutrients and maintaining good water quality, so that's always good. And the final plant I'm going to add is the Alodia, and I'm just going to throw a few stems in and let them float. And even though I might not leave them in there long term, they are going to really help in the first few weeks of this setup in using up any excess nutrients that you tend to get in the early stages of a setup, just whilst you're waiting for the ecosystem to properly establish. So now that all the plants are in, I'm going to grab the sponge filter out of the tank that the fish are currently in. Now this is also the sponge filter that was in their original setup. I'm going to give it a good squeeze out in the new setup here, and it's going to look a little bit messy, but this is going to seed the tank with beneficial bacteria, which in turn is going to break down the waste of the fish once they go in. And I'm going to give it 24 hours now though before adding the fish. This is going to give the tank a chance to clear up, and it will also allow the temperature to stabilise. Okay, it is now 24 hours later and everything is looking nice. Plants are looking good. crystal clear water, so we are almost ready to add the inhabitants, but there's a couple of things I do want to do just before. And the first thing I want to do is to add a little bit of Fritzine 7, which contains live nitrifying bacteria, and this is going to help to cycle the tank. Obviously, we have already added the beneficial bacteria when we squeezed the sponge filter out, and the plants would also have been covered in beneficial bacteria. So this just is one more step really to ensure that we're not going to have any issues with water quality once the fish go in. And the second thing I want to do is to turn the lights down to the lowest setting, and this is just going to help reduce the stress to the fish as they move into their new home. So we'll net the fish out of their holding tank and set them up a little drip acclimation. Okay, drip acclimation done. Let's get these guys in. So first up, we've got a little nearite snail, and we'll just pop her in there, which is going to be a nice little algae eater for us, alongside all the other snails that will have no doubt gone in attached to the plants. But it is now time for the fish. So as I mentioned before, this is just a small group of ember tetras. And there we go. They're in. So I am going to turn the lights off now, give everyone a chance to settle in, and we'll check back in 24 hours. Okay, so it is 24 hours later, and everyone seems to have settled in nicely. I do want to add a few shrimp at some point, but I'll give it a month or two before adding them, and shrimp do generally prefer a bit more of an established ecosystem. But yeah, I'm pleased with how it's come out. Definitely happy with the under gravel filter. Perfect for a little tank like this, as it doesn't take up hardly any space. Also, I forgot to mention I have added a pothos cutting, so hopefully that will take off and start to grow in over the next couple of months.